Hello and welcome to the Art of Decluttering podcast. I'm your host, Amy Revell, and it is lovely coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. Do you know that over half of the listeners to this podcast don't live in Australia? That nearly half of our listeners live in the US of A. So welcome to all my US listeners. Do you know, Australian listeners, that one of the things that tricks me in life constantly is time zones? But I have managed to work out that when I drop an episode at just after midnight on a Monday morning, that our American friends actually get it on their Sunday night. So they get to listen to the podcast effectively a day early, even though it's the same time. But then what do I know about time zones? But welcome wherever you are in the world. If you're in the US, I would love for you to jump into Apple Podcasts and leave a podcast review this week. I want to hear from you, what you enjoy, what you want to hear more of. You are not heading straight back into your school year after summer, but I'm hoping that this series will be really helpful for our friends all around the world that do have their school year start in July or in May, wherever you are in the world, that you can come back and listen to these when they're at an appropriate time for you. In Australia, our school goes back. Some students went back today. And some students have gone back a few days ago. So I hope this is particularly relevant. We're talking about school books and lockers, and I'm going to cover things all the way from primary school with readers and library books, all the way through to high schoolers who have their lockers and textbooks. So I'm going to speak about all of those things. A couple of updates for you. The bike that I was decluttering on our bike and scooters episode has been delivered to its recipient. I can't remember if I've told you that or not. So that has gone. And the experiment has finished because we filled all 4 cavities above the windows with the Diet Coke cans, and there was no room for any more. And so Cal still hadn't taken them down. I don't think he listens to the podcast anymore. So maybe we need to leave some reviews to encourage him to listen. And so they've been taken down. The moral of the story is if you put things out of reach, even if they annoy you, you're quite possibly going to ignore them and just learn to live with it. So don't put things out of reach where you can't get to it easily, because even when you want to declutter it, you may be, hindered from getting it because you've got multiple steps to get to it. So let's jump into today's episode and let's start with primary schoolers. Whether you've got a primary schooler yourself or you've got kids that are preschool, or maybe this episode is a great one for you to share with a sister or a brother or a friend or a neighbor who you know would get great benefit from having this area organized. One of the challenges that lots and lots and lots and lots of parents that I work with struggle with is misplaced library books and misplaced reading. So reading books, if you're at one of our overseas listeners, readers are what our students get given in primary school, and they're age-appropriate books that they come home with. They practice their reading. Usually they read out loud to someone, and they swap those over every day or two. And those books are very hard to tell apart from the books that you have in your own bookshelves and in your own children's bedrooms. And it can be really stressful for children and for parents and for schools and teachers when these books just go walkabouts. So you might have readers that come home. So what it tends to happen is a child will bring home just one reader each night. At least that's how it works with my children. One reader each night. The idea is that you read it to an adult, you take it back, you swap it, and then you get a new one. So what you want to think about with readers is to have a routine around what you do with your reader and when you do your reading with your child. I always found that keeping the reader bag in their school bag until it was time to do their readers was what works for us, because then they didn't bring it out, put it on the table, take it into their bedrooms, put it in the toy room. They actually just had it in their bag until it was reader time, and they went and got it. They bought it, we read, and then they would put it straight back in their bag. I would recommend that you don't have any other home for the reader than in the school bag or being read. That way you're not going to be running around any time in the morning trying to work out, oh my gosh, where is it? Did we read it? How did it work? Which kid's reader is which if you've got multiple children. So that is a great way to just keep it as its home in the school bag. And it's really helpful too for families. If you can have a consistent time to do the readers, my kids would get really stressed out if for some reason we'd forgotten to do their reader. And they would be saying to me at like 8:45 for a 9 a.m. school start, we have to do my reader now. I have to do it. I have to do it. Because sometimes the school has like, if you do 100 days in a row, you get a star. But it doesn't really take into account that not every family can do 100 days in a row. That's a really big ask. What if mum and dad are sick, or mum and dad are shift workers, or the kids are sick, or there's lots of kids and not the ratio of parents that can get through those readers, or the kids are really tired, or the kids want to read something else, or they find reading really difficult. So if you have some kind of consistency, it can remove some of the stress from that. And then once it's read, we used to have to sign it. I really hope there's an app at some point that gets parents out of signing a piece of paper, but you put it straight back into the school bag. Now, I used to do reading. So what we had at our school is parents would volunteer every morning. So from about 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, there would be 1 or 2 parents in the classroom every single day of the year. And their job was to listen to readers. So you would listen to the child read the book they'd read the night before. So that increases their literacy because they're reading it again. There's familiarity, and words they may have stumbled on the night before, they may have mastered by the morning. And so you would go through and you would just sit there and the kids would read to you. You'd swap their reader and then you'd get the next kid to come through. One of the things that I always noticed was that schools would issue these reader bags and they were all the same. And for our school, they were navy blue, but I would imagine they're just whatever color your school uniform is. But you can't actually see what's inside. And the only way to differentiate them is a little name on the back. Instead, if your school allows, I would consider getting a clear plastic, like a zip-up folder or a clear plastic zip-up pocket, and use that for the readers. That way your kids can see what's inside. They can, see it in their bag and see really easily what it is. But it also means that if they're doing reading at school or they're swapping their readers over, they can find what's theirs. Because what you could do is on the front is you could contact their name on it or do something that makes it stand out. We want to make this easy for our little people. We don't need to complicate it. We just want them to be able to find their reader, do their reader, put it back in their bag, and then easily access it at school. So that's one of the things that I've found really helpful is don't have those books just roaming around the house. Keep them in their bags if possible and use that clear plastic folder. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these clear plastic zip-up folders and pockets because they are my favourite thing for when it comes to all types of books. The other part of reading is libraries. And libraries are brilliant. They are so awesome. I'm an author. Like I love reading. I love encouraging reading. I love the local library. My books I wouldn't even know how many libraries around Australia. And so there you go. If you want to actually read a copy of my book, but you're not super keen on buying one, as well as being able to listen on Audible and use your Kindle, you can actually just go to your library and borrow a copy. But kids at school, most primary schools have quite a substantial library. And the routine is often that the class gets to go and have library sessions once a fortnight or once a week. And they might get read a book by the librarian. They might do an activity around a book. It's just making them, developing that love of reading and love of books in children. And then what usually happens is they get to borrow. Now, some schools you can borrow 3 or 4 books. You take it home in your library bag. When I was little, the library bags were always like a fabric drawstring bag. My mum appliqued. There's a blast from the past in terms of a lost craft in the world. My mum used to applique our names to the front of our library bags. So you would take your library bag, return the books that you had read and borrow new books. And it was the same if you were going to your local public library. Our family, you'd take your library bag, you'd return what you'd read and you'd borrow new ones. One of the major sticking points in families being able to integrate library books into their reading schedule and into their homes is that everything kind of gets mingled in together and you can't find the library books. And, until the last couple of years, you wouldn't even get an email to say, hey, these are the books that you've borrowed and this is when they're due. So there's a couple of tricks for you to be able to use the school library, use your local community library and not lose the books. So one of them is that you would have a spot designated for library books in your home. It may be part on a bookshelf. For a couple of clients, I've actually set up magazine holders within the bookshelf, and all library books go within the magazine holder. Now, what that does is it gives you a really clear place where you put the books, but it makes it really clear when you need to return them that that's where they go. So that might be something you can set up for your kids or set up for yourself so that you can differentiate. And then you're not living out of a library bag, particularly if you're someone who borrows quite a lot of library books. One of the things that little kids can struggle with is just remembering where to put the books. So you might have that magazine spot or you may have somewhere else. But how about instead of having a library bag that is fabric or that is not see-through, could you get, like I said before, some kind of clear plastic zip-up folder or a pocket, something like that, where you can put the library books in and actually see them. Now, there's heaps of options if you go to a stationery shop like Officeworks or Office First and have a look online. There's some really great options around there so that you can make it easy for your little people. And if your family's comfortable with it, you could just have a little clear library bag for each person that sits on a bookshelf. And the books sit in the library bag. So when it's time to return them to school or it's time to return them to your local library, you just grab the bag. So just think about creative ways that you can integrate reading these, because you don't want to feel bad that you keep forgetting to send back school books. I'm forever decluttering and finding, like 10 years after kids left primary school, a little collection of readers and library books that never went back to the local school. So as much as we can help it, we want to keep these books in rotation, not have unnecessary expenses for schools, but encourage the love of reading in your kids. Why don't we go to a quick break, because I'm excited to talk to you about high schoolers. I've chatted to my kids this afternoon and talked to them about lockers and textbooks, and I want to share some things with you, but I'll be back before you know it. One of the things I struggled with, listeners, when my kids started high school is that I was no longer able to be involved in the state of their locker. Now, I have vivid memories of high school myself because my locker, no surprises here, was really well organised. My books were well organised. My pencil case was well organised. I didn't lose textbooks. I didn't lose English books. I didn't lose notes. It was all so well organised, and I found it really quick and easy to get ready for class, and I very rarely turned up without what was needed. But I was acutely aware, particularly of the boys in my year level, of the state of their lockers. There was a jumper stuffed in the back. There were like broken lunch boxes. There was a school bag shoved in. There were textbooks that were still in their wrapping and other textbooks that the covers had fallen off on. There was a calculator that they weren't quite sure was theirs, or maybe it was their mates. And it was just a right old mess. And so I just want to share a few tips around how you can help your high schoolers to manage their textbooks and workbooks and have that organised. My first tip is that you probably don't need everything that they put on the book list. I have like a dream one day when I'm, not quite so busy, is I would go into the Education Minister's office. Say, excuse me, Education Minister, I would like to help you reform the book lists for primary schools and high schools. Because every single year, families are over ordering and schools have stock that is just excess and they don't know what to do with. And there's such a waste. So that's one of the things, maybe in 15 years, Amy, who has plenty of time on her hands, is going to go and solve the problem. But in the meantime, instead of just automatically buying everything that's on the kids' book lists, I'm talking in terms of stationery. You probably do need the textbooks, but, even then, my sister was over today and saying that my nephew had a textbook that was still shrink wrapped from last year. So you may not even need all the textbooks. But what you want to do is actually think about how does my kid work? What kind of stationery and supplies is going to work for them? Do they like taking notes on loose leaf paper? Or maybe they like doing it in an exercise book. Maybe they like having one folder per subject. You might color code it. So I've got one kid who color codes and one who doesn't. You might have exercise books that have holes punched in them. So within a binder, the exercise book can sit. So what we've done with a child that has color coordinated is it's plastic sleeves at the back for handouts. Then there's some loose leaf paper, and then there's an exercise book, and that's all contained within the binder. And then if you're going to class, you just simply slip your textbook into the front of the binder, and that's all you need to take to each class. And that has worked so well for one of my kids. I've worked with clients who have done some really cool things. So you could get color coordinated zip up binders or pockets, and you can even then often keep the textbook in the pack. So when you're going to class, all you need to do is grab like the biology pack, and it's got everything that you're going to need for biology. The benefit of that is when it comes to homework, they actually bring everything home. The amount of times that we have in our own household experienced, I've got homework for humanities, but I left the textbook at home, but I brought my exercise book home. I brought the textbook home, but I don't have the questions. So if it's all in a pack together, that will really help teenagers. Their brains are going through a lot as they mature, and they're taking in so much in school. If we can make the state of their lockers just a little bit tidier, that could help. One of the questions that I have for you, and just jumping back, I just had a thought around the book list. Sometimes they get a little bit excited and say, the kids need 4 display books. But from history that they've never actually used a display book in the history of their, high school years. And so what you could do is just buy one. And if that one gets used, you could buy another. Or you could just have a little stash at home rather than sending them to school with that big pack of, loose leaf paper and exercise books and binders and all of the things. Maybe you actually have a little stash at home, so as they need them, they can ask you for them. Anyway, just had that thought. I didn't want to forget about it. One of the things I said to Jesse, who's my eldest, when he first started year 7, we were talking about how to have a tidy locker and the importance of that, because it does free you up from, arriving at class without what you need. And I had said to him, this is, remember, my first child in high school. I said, mate, why don't I come with you one morning and I'll have a look at your locker with you and we'll set it up together. Does anybody think that he was enthusiastic about that? No. He just looks at me like, you would not dare, Mum. Do not dare. So what I actually said to him is, why don't you take a photo of your locker for me? And when you come home, we can kind of work it out together where things go. And he was very happy to do that because he didn't want to be overwhelmed with it. And sometimes, year 7s or even year 11s and 12s need a little bit of help with some of that planning, because it may be something they just have never thought of. There's these, I'm trying to think how to describe them, like a metal but mesh magazine holder, similar to what you could use for those library books. Sometimes you can fit those in lockers and you can have, everything standing up, because one of the things that frustrates me as a parent is you buy a lovely new textbook, you send it off to school, and by the time it comes home at the end of the year, there's no front and back cover and the spine's broken in half. And that's usually because it's been shoved in the locker, it's been bent, it's been twisted, it's slouched whenever you try and stand it up. So having some kind of dividers like a metal magazine rack actually could help within the locker if you've got a teen who would be willing to actually give thought to that system. But maybe getting them to take a photo and show you at home might be part of that. I'm trying to think what else is helpful, but I think the key for library books and readers and textbooks and workbooks is just to have a home for them. So whether it's magazine racks or clear plastic folders or zip-up binders, having a system that works for your individual child is what's going to help you. And don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Don't necessarily, if the school's okay without it being all uniform, think about how you can just make it easier for your child. Maybe they come home with 4 library books every Wednesday after library, but you know that your family will only get through 1. So maybe you could say to your child, how about we just bring 1 library book home? And so there's, more enthusiasm of actually reading through that one book than the overwhelm of, I don't know which one to choose and we never get through it and my friends will read all their library books. There's not one rule fits all, but it will reduce a lot of stress and cost in your family if the books in the school year don't go randomly missing or get randomly wrecked, or you find them under the bed 10 years after they've graduated high school. So I hope that's really helpful for you. It's a really practical one today. It's one you can talk to your little people about, you can talk to your big people about. You might even think about it for your own library books. But I hope that it is really helpful, that you can implement even just one of those tips that will make life just that little bit easier as the kids head back to school. We've got one more episode in our back to school series, and that's talking about extracurricular activities and after school and before school activities. So in 2 days, that's going to drop into your feed. In fact, you know what I might do? I might make it 3 days so we get back into our Monday routine as of February. I think I might do that, because then we're going to weekly episodes in Feb. And I've already got some of those lined up. I'm interviewing a really awesome guest tomorrow for an episode that'll be dropping in a couple of weeks. So thank you again for subscribing and following and listening along. Come and visit me in our Facebook community group. Just search The Art of Decluttering on Facebook. And look, if you search The Art of Decluttering anywhere on the internet, you'll find podcast, community, our services, all of those types of things. So thank you for being with me this week, and I will see you next week. Bye. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land this podcast is recorded on. I would also like to pay respects to their elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love you to rate and review the show on your podcast app. That will help others to find the Art of Decluttering podcast as well. If you'd like any more information, you can visit theartofdecluttering.com.au, and I would love to see you in my Facebook group. Just search the Art of Decluttering community on Facebook and join today. I hope that you have an incredible rest of your day and enjoy the freedom.